Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Education Works Forum this morning on the topic of have you ever thought about running for school board? We're going to get started in just a moment. I will tell you that this 30-minute webinar is being recorded, and we will get the link to all listeners. So hang out for just one moment with me, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. We do have you in mute only, or in mute and listen only mode, but we'll tell you in just a moment how to answer any questions you might have during our time together this morning. So let's go ahead and get started. We can get to the housekeeping slide, Tracy and Chris, thank you. So on the right hand of your screen, you should see a functionality that allows you to ask questions in the chat function. We're going to have two panelists with us for the next 30 minutes and hear from both of them, and we will open it up for about 8 to 10 minutes at the end of the half hour for questions. So please get your questions in mind, ask them anytime you would like, or as they occur to you in the next few minutes. Before we introduce our panelists this morning, I think most of you, if you're in our database, are familiar with our organization, but we are the Consortium of Florida Education Foundations representing the local education foundations aligned with almost all of the countywide school districts in the state of Florida, 63 of the 67. And our folks are largely a programmatic focus of supporting teachers and students in a variety of ways. With board members who are largely from the private sector, about 80%, typically with one school board member on the board of the Ed Foundation in an ex officio capacity and the superintendent, but really about marshaling community resources to support students and teachers in their local public schools. Next slide. So with that programmatic focus, being involved in anything that's political or advocacy-oriented is really not within the scope of education foundations. However, some do get involved in community engagement and serve as a source of information in their communities. So a couple of examples when it comes to school board members are on the screen here. The Jacksonville Public Education Fund, they host with a number of other community organizations, the PTA, the Junior League, Women League of Voters, United Way. They host forums regularly, so all candidates have the chance to get out in front of the community, and they also have a blog where people can ask questions of school board members. And then to the lower right on the screen is a voter's guide that the Hillsborough Education Foundation has published periodically with their local newspaper to ask the same questions of all candidates and explain the role of school board members in their local community. So those are examples of roles of a few education foundations in Florida. Today we're going to hear from two panelists, and Andrea Messina, who is the Executive Director of the Florida School Boards Association, which is the professional organization for all of Florida's elected school board members. She previously was with FSBA as the Director of Board Development, and she's a former school board member from Charlotte County and a high school English teacher. So welcome, Andrea. We're excited to have her with us today to share a little bit from her vantage point on the state level. And then you're also going to hear from Beth McCall, who is now the Vice Chair of the Marion County School Board. Beth has a background in education and business and leadership, working with actually her local education foundation as both a volunteer leader and executive director in Marion County. And also worked with the Monroe Foundation in healthcare in Marion County. So she was recently elected to school board this past election cycle and has that fresh perspective to bring with us today. We're going to start with Andrea. And Andrea, if you could just give us really kind of an overview of how school boards operate in Florida, the very basics for folks who are not familiar. The size of boards, districts, history, a little bit about what this role as a constitutional officer means in Florida. If you could share a few minutes on those topics with our group today.
You bet. And first, I want to apologize for Tina Pinkeson, who, if some people signed up thinking that they were going to hear from Tina, she actually has pneumonia today, so I'm stepping in for her, but she does send her warmest personal regards. With regard to the responsibilities of individual school board members and school boards in Florida, these can be found in the Constitution of the state of Florida. The Constitution requires that each county is its own school board, which is a little different than some other states. That's one reason I wanted to point it out. In other states, school boards are statutorily formed, which means the legislature sort of determines the structure. But in Florida, it's in the Constitution. And then the general powers of the school board are lined out statutorily, which include determining policies and programs for the district, adopting rules, that sort of thing. The general powers of the school board are found in section 1001.41 of Florida statutes. I'm confident that there are people on this phone call who want to go in and read that area. But what they'll find, basically, like I said, it talks about the school board determining policies, adopting rules, entering into contracts and things like that. Interestingly, the statutes and the Constitution recognize the board as the corporate body for the public education in every county. It's not individual school board members that have responsibility. The responsibility lies with the board. And in Florida, most boards are comprised of 5 members. Some of our larger, more urban areas may have 7 members. We have one that has 8, which is a unique situation. Uh-oh, I'm starting to get feedback. And then we also have some boards that have 9 members, like Miami, some of the really large boards. And they are structured the county determines how it's going to be structured. Many times local communities have voted to have a few at-large members and some members who represent individual districts. Some counties have individual districts only. Other counties have county-wide only. So it really depends on the county. You have to sort of look at your county charter to find out exactly how in your county the structure is. But by and large, there are 5 school board members. You have to live in the county you represent, but by law, you actually represent the entire county. The election cycles are every 2 years. So while board members are elected for 4 years, we'll call them the presidential cycle and then the gubernatorial cycle, because those are the elections that they mirror, the election cycles. There would be 3 board members up for election maybe during the presidential and then 2 in the gubernatorial or something like that, so that at no time would all 5 board members be on the ballot. Now I say that, but if there was a special circumstance where the governor had to appoint someone due to a death or a resignation, it's possible that you could have 4 or 5 up at a time, but it's very unlikely. The responsibilities of a school board member by law are that you attend this one school board meeting a month. That's really what the law says. Most school boards go far and above that particular barometer, but that's what the law requires.
Thanks, Andrea. And you did mention something about living in the county that you're in, but I think you meant the district, right?
I'm sorry, I did mean the district. Yes, so typically one county would have 5 districts, school board member from District 1, District 2, District 3, District 4, District 5. You have to live in the district that you represent, but many times you're elected county-wide, but you actually, even if you live in District 1, you're elected in District 1, you represent your entire county by law.
And those districts are defined in the county charter? People could
typically, yes. Now, when there is redistricting, which would be after a census, the county commission, as you know, goes in and they sort of do some redistricting. The school board does some redistricting, but the definition of whether or not you're county-wide is what gets voted on locally. The actual district lines themselves are drawn up by the school board, the county commission, the bodies that do it. And many times, county commission and school board mirror each other. Other counties, they do not.
Great. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And we've actually already got a question that I think really speaks to these next points, Andrea. Someone
Okay.
asked, if you're elected, what certifications do you need after you earn your position?
Okay, yeah, that's your basic qualifications and process and timeline for candidacy, very first box here. The qualifications are that you have to be eligible. Let's see, for superintendent, you have to be, well, I'm sorry, let me start over. Um, you have to be 18 and you have to be a citizen of the United States and you have to live in your district. Those are the basic qualifications. There are no requirements that you have to have been an educator, you have to have been a banker, a lawyer, anything. And one of the reasons for that is these are representative bodies of a community, and a community gets to decide who they want to represent them. So you may have a board, a school board, filled with business people. You may have a school board that has one business person, one attorney, one stay-at-home person, one retiree. It could be whatever your county decides. Once you get elected, the only requirement by law that you have in order to, and it's not even to maintain your position because they won't remove you from office, but the only requirement by law is that you do 4 hours of ethics training annually. Now, we, the Florida School Boards Association, our board of directors is comprised of school board members from across the state, and we have a committee that is our leadership development committee, and our own members have determined, we have created some certification programs that we have available to school board members, and what those programs are comprised of is what other school board members from across the state have decided that they believe school board members need in order to be effective school board members. So there are no required certifications. It's only voluntary, and of course I could certainly create arguments on why you would want to participate in our training and other trainings beyond us, but there is no actual requirement for that. With regard to the process and timeline of candidacy, many people think about running for school board for several years before they actually take the plunge. The first step is to go down and get the packet from your local supervisor of elections. Just picking up the packet doesn't necessarily mean that you've become a candidate. You actually will have to fill out the paperwork, open up a campaign account, those sorts of things. Then you become an announced candidate. But then there's a qualification period, and most of you are probably familiar with either the signing of little ballot cards, which allows someone's name to be put on the ballot, or there's a fee that has to be paid, and that fee is directly related to a certain percentage of the salary that board members would earn in that county. So the fee in one county might be $1,200, the fee in another county could easily be $750, or there's the process of collecting signatures to get your name on the ballot. Each signature collection typically has to be validated by the supervisor of elections. I think it's a dime a card, something like that. And then that qualification period typically happens in midsummer. Once you have qualified to be a candidate, then your name will appear on the ballot. And the ballot, the first round of elections is in the primary. Depending on how many people are on the ballot, you may or may not get elected in the primary. But you could easily be elected in the primary. However, you wouldn't take office until November. And if there's a runoff election in any of the races across the state or in your county, that would be determined at the November general election, and then all board members are installed, whether they were elected in the primary or the general election, at the November board meeting, which is typically around the week of Thanksgiving, and that's when you would start your new 4-year term of office.
Awesome. And before we get into these characteristics of effective school board members and what research tells us about effective school boards as a body, you touched on salary there quickly, and I know other states it's different. There may not be a full salary, there may be some type of stipend, but how does salary for school board members work in Florida?
In Florida, the Office of Management and Budget has a formula for all constitutional officers. In fact, they just came out with it, and if you'll remind me, Mary, I'll send you the link so that anybody that's interested in seeing that that list, it's run by county. You'll have a direct link to the formula that creates it, but it's based on the population in a county. So Miami-Dade's will be the highest salary in the state, and Jefferson's will likely be one of the lower salaries in the state, and the others will fall in between. It's really considered a part-time job, so it's not going to be a salary that's going to earn you more than $50,000 or anything like that. Most salaries are between, say, $18,000, $20,000 and $36,000, $38,000. There are a few that are higher, a few that are lower. But that is because in Florida, as I said before, school board members are constitutional officers, and all constitutional officers in the state of Florida have salaries. It's also because as a constitutional officer in the state of Florida, school board members have taxing authorities, which goes into some of those responsibilities down the road. And in other states, for example, your school boards don't have taxing authorities. I liken it to your local sheriff. In other states, the school board has to ask the county commission for a budget, similar to the way Florida sheriffs have to go to the county commission and ask for a budget. And because of that, the fact that in Florida school board members are outside of that process and have their own taxing authority, that also means that you assume a certain amount of exposure to risk and lawsuits and those sorts of things, and that's why Florida has salary for constitutional officers.
Interesting, thank you. So we're going to need to move on in a minute, but can you just give us a few highlights, because these are interesting articles that Tina had brought to us, and for everybody participating, it's a link when you get the slides, and we've also got attachments in your panel for the webinar that you can download them. But can you tell us a little bit about these two documents, the signs of an effective school board member and characteristics of effective school boards?
You bet. First off, we do distinguish between an individual member and a board, partly because the corporate authority lies with the board. However, you are an individual member. So there are different sort of behaviors and things that can help you be effective both as an individual member and as a member of the collective board. And that's what these two articles speak to. The signs of an effective school board member, this is the individual, and it really has to do with recognizing that an individual member does not have authority outside of the board. And the reason that that's an important distinction is because sometimes individual board members will want to, at a Rotary meeting or at a citizens town hall meeting, something like that, say that the board supports, I don't know, let's call it dress codes, when in truth an individual member cannot, and by law does not, speak for the board unless that person is the chair and the board has already made a decision and given the chairman the authority to speak on an issue. So there's a real distinction between individual authority of an individual board member versus what is the position of the board. And if someone were to look up these articles, and I strongly suggest that you do, what you'll see is an individual board member should respect the team, should know the difference between staff and the board itself, because there really are lines of demarcation, and in our training we go through some of those lines. An individual board member is really responsible to share their own positions, but listen to the positions of other members. They need to come to meetings prepared. They need to ask tough questions. They need to keep on learning about the school district, and they need to respect their oath. An actual board itself needs to spend some time working together to have common vision, high expectations about staff and students. Additionally, they need to be policy and accountability driven as a full board. They need to have goals that involve a process of setting goals. They need to make sure that resources are aligned to achieve the goals that the board has set. They need to look at data, be data savvy, and they also need to commit to learning as a board so that all board members have shared information in which to make decisions.
Thank you. And I know you've got some great training and support. We probably don't have time to get into detail on that, but both for individual and for collective. I think the training that Tina was describing was about, is it a master board certification for school boards if they go through a process together?
We have training for individual board members, and we have trainings for the board superintendent as a governance team.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, so Beth McCall, if you could share with us a little bit about your story of how and why you decided to run for school board in Marion County.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, everyone. I have thought for many years that running for school board might be a goal that I would want to obtain. And coming to the decision that I came to, I think it's very important that those that are considering running meet with community business leaders, community leaders in volunteer organizations, to see if the support for your candidacy would be there. If it's not there, of course, it should not completely stop you from running, but you should really find out if there is community support for your candidacy. So I think that is a key issue, and there was for me, especially through our business community. So I've been in the community for a very long time and really have my finger on the pulse of Marion County. So that helped with my decision making as well. And I felt like I could bring leadership qualities to our school board. So those were my decision making processes. Of course, my family was involved in that process because when you run for office, oftentimes your families, of course, are right there with you, but it is a difficult time. It's very time consuming. Oftentimes can get ugly. Fortunately, it did not for my candidacy. So your family has to be a very large part of that decision making. So that was what drove me to run.
Okay. So you mentioned the time commitment, and I think you're talking more about the candidacy time commitment, but once you were elected, what did it look like in your first months on the job? What were your priorities, and what are you coming to realize the actual time commitment is for you in your role?
Well, I think the first 6 to 8 weeks was very time consuming because I was meeting with all the principals in my district and trying to attend SAC meetings. I was meeting with key department heads to learn their departments. I was really delving into some of the policies and procedures. One of the best resources was the Florida School Board Association and all of the training that they provide. So I think the learning curve was the 6 to 8 week window of time being a new board member, but you really have to get a feel for the top issues. You may, of course, I would suggest even during your candidacy that you really meet with all of the department heads and know the issues. From the community perspective, sometimes we think we know the issues, but once you really begin to meet with those in charge, you understand the different sides of those issues. Meeting with the CFO on a regular basis, especially in the beginning. Florida School Board Association does a fabulous finance workshop, but the budget process of the school system is complicated, and there's always a lot of questions to ask. Also, one of the things when you receive your board packet, especially as a new board member, but always, I would say, always be prepared, and once you receive your board packet, please read it. And if you have questions, go to the people that can answer your questions prior to the board meeting, because then you will be more knowledgeable and be able to make a better decision. So that continues, but really the learning curve is getting to know everybody, all your principals, and the different school issues in the beginning.
Thank you. So, we've been talking about sort of the how and the what of the role, but I think the big question really is, where are you finding that you have the most potential, the why? Why would you run for school board, and where do you think you're really having the most potential to have an impact for Marion County students?
Well, I think my knowledge of the school system, being involved as the executive director of the foundation, helped me a lot in being able to assess the different issues and priorities that do come up. My leadership skills, I am a leader in our community, and I think that my leadership skills, my collaboration skills, help with our board members. I hope that I can bring calm sometimes to the board and have everybody look at the issues that come before the board, that not from a personal bias, but from an organizational perspective on what is best for the organization and for our students. And I always try to keep our students at the top of that priority list.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions now. And I haven't seen any more pop up, but I'm going to pose one back to both of our panelists. But I'm going to go back to Andrea. Really, you know, getting back to that why for you. Why should a citizen consider running for school board? And you mentioned earlier when we were chatting that decision process can be a couple years out. But tell us a little bit about the why and the process for thinking about it.
Well, I mean, there are people who can give you keynote addresses on the importance of public schools in this country. And so when you ask me why should someone do it, it's to ensure that the public schools in this country are the strongest and the most well-run schools in the world. Now, we know we have work to do on that, but each community is a representative democracy, and to ensure that when I ran for school board, you know, one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that the person who represented me have good intentions. I could trust what they were doing to make good decisions, because I had children and I wanted my children to make sure that they had the best schooling. The candidate running in an open seat wasn't that person. That's the only reason I stood up, because I knew that I had, at the time, I questioned his motives for running, and I wanted somebody who was really interested in contributing to the improvement of the schools in my community. That's why I specifically ran. And if you think about it, and we say this all the time, school boards have people's two most valuable assets: their children and their money. And the responsibility of the school board is to make sure that those two assets are protected at all times.
Good point. That is the essential question. Thank you, Andrea. And I've got two questions here that are essentially the same, both for Beth. While campaigning, what were your biggest challenges? And then also, once you became a school board member, what were your biggest challenges?
While I was campaigning, Marion County is a retirement community. We have a lot of retirees in gated communities, so being able to get into those communities, I had to develop a strategy, and what I did was I found key people in each of those communities that I knew to kind of lead the charge for me. So they helped me get into those communities, and they helped me get to know those people. I truly enjoyed campaigning. I got to meet a lot of different people. There was not a lot of contention in my campaign, so it was run very cleanly, and the two gentlemen that ran against me, we all had the same goals of taking care of our students and making sure that we had the best schools possible to run. I would say the main thing is get to know your community and try to put people in key places. Door to door is often very difficult, but if you have the ability to do that in some of your neighborhoods, it was difficult to do, but we did that in some neighborhoods.
And a follow-up question there that we have for you, Beth, and then I've got one more for Andrea before we wrap up. What about fundraising? Can you any advice for candidates on that front?
Yes, let me go back to once I was a school board member, what was the most challenging, and then I'll answer that. I think the most challenging thing for me becoming a school board member was my leadership style is to get everybody in the room and to begin to collaborate on solutions. Being a school board member, you don't have the ability to do that with your other school board members unless it's in a workshop, a school board meeting, an advertised meeting. So that has been difficult because oftentimes you cannot talk to your fellow board members about things that will come on your agenda. So that has been probably the most difficult thing for me to learn is not being able to do that. And then fundraising.
The Sunshine Law, because of.
Yes, because of the Sunshine Law. That is correct. The fundraising, I was fortunate. I raised quite a bit of money. Again, I went to, before I ever ran for office, I went to key business people and got them to commit to a financial contribution even before I filled that packet out. So I raised around $40,000 for my candidacy. I don't exactly remember the amount. So I was able to do, quite a bit with that. I think that's sometimes a little high. I may have raised a little bit more, honestly, don't remember. But fundraising is key. You have to be able, social media does a great job. I had a young person that was on my social media. She did all of my social media, and you have a great way to get your word out. And in the marketing aspect, you have to think about how you can get your message out the best. And one of the things you also need to do is be sure that everybody uses red, white, blue, yellow for school boards. I chose very different colors, and my signs really stood out. So you need to think about things that stand out. But you have to have money to run a campaign, and along with that, you have to choose a treasurer. I felt very, very confident with the lady that I chose. She's a banker by profession, and the financial forms that must be filled out on a regular basis require somebody that truly knows what they're doing. So be sure that your treasurer understands the process, the reporting process, and try to secure donations prior, or commitments for donations prior to filling out your paperwork.
Great advice. And then we're going to wrap up with you, Andrea. A question for you is a citizen considering running in DeSoto County, and she's asking about the ongoing support for new board members in their first year or so that's offered by FSBA.
Okay, great. We typically have, as soon as the person gets sworn into office, which is November, the week before Thanksgiving, we have the very first week of December, typically around December 3rd, 4th, 5th, we have what we would call new school board member boot camp, and it's a one-day, all-day, full session only for new school board members. And in truth, on that day, our main goal is to keep new school board members out of jail. And I know that sounds strong, but as Beth mentioned, there's the Florida Sunshine Law, there's public records laws, there's a lot of things that are involved in the transition from private citizen to public official, and we want to make sure that our board members don't get lost in any of that. So that's a full day. Then we have our annual conference connected with that. So the new school board member training is on Tuesday. Our annual conference is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it's at that time that new school board members will meet their peers across the state, whether they're newly elected or continuing to serve. They get a mentor through our association. That's the beginning of December. Then typically in March, we have what we would call school board member part 2 training, new school board member part 2 training. That's typically a day and a half. connected with that is also our Day in the Legislature training. So we do some training on legislative advocacy. We also, as Beth mentioned, we do forums on some key topics that our Leadership Development Committee has decided new school board members should learn about, including the one Beth mentioned, which is school finance, personnel and bargaining issues, policy development, and boardsmanship. Each of those are kind of one-day sessions that we bring all the new school board members together in a central location. And one of the reasons for that, because some people have asked us, why don't we just put the training online? Well, we do put some online, but our members tell us time and time again that the real value comes with the networking of their peers, partially because of what Beth said, which is you can't speak to your own peers on your own board because of the Sunshine Law, but someone in DeSoto County can talk to someone in Charlotte County or Lee County or Hendry County, and the only way to do that is to get to know them well, and the way to do that is to spend some time with them. So that's just the first year. In addition, we have a June conference, so they'll go to the December conference typically. They'll do some of these trainings along the way. They'll come to the June conference typically, and it's a pretty full year. I think Beth can tell you if you were to participate in all the trainings that we have, including some webinars that go along the way or call-in question, brown bag lunch call-in sessions, you could have some pretty regular every week interaction, and we're also always available by call or by email.
Mary, if I can, that's what I wanted to say, that on many occasions I have called Andrea or Tina and had a question, and they're always very responsive. The trainings are invaluable, and meeting other new school board members and then veteran school board members, and that networking is also invaluable.
Thank you, Beth. And actually, I do have one final question, and we're going to wrap up. I promise. We're a little late, but it looks like folks are sticking with us because they appreciate this topic and our panelists. So, Beth, you're coming up soon on 1 year that you've been elected. Can you think of one of our participants today wants to know, can you think of an opportunity that you've really been able to say, I had a positive impact, that you're starting to feel like you're having a positive impact in Marion County?
Well, one definitely, which was on my platform when I ran, was to really enhance music and arts in our schools, because being a musician myself, I understand the importance and the correlation between reading and math and all of the subjects, science, that music and art correlate with. And through that, we have been able to, this school year, fund a position, a district position for music and art specifically, and we have never had that before, and I'm very proud of that. And our community passed a referendum 3 years ago, and one of the benefits of the referendum was our music and arts program. So I'm very proud to say that I've really worked hard on that and pushed that, as well as our career technical program that was a part of my platform. We are well on our way to developing. We had a good one, but we're going to have an excellent one. So I've had an impact in those areas, and those are two areas that I feel are very, very important. Again, we need to be sure that education is relevant to all of our students, and having those two as a large component of our system, I think, brings tremendous relevance.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. So let's go ahead and wrap up with these resources. Great session. I really do appreciate, Andrea, you stepping in for Tina, and tell her we wish her well.
I sure will.
We do have some resources here, and I'd like to add to those the statute that you mentioned, Andrea, that outlines the responsibilities of being a school board member. So we'll add that before we send it out to our participants today and put it on our website. But few other things for you to take a look at, plus those two handouts that we referenced early with research on what makes for an effective school board member and school board, characteristics of effective school boards. And then this is where we're going to put these the link to this recording on our website, and it'll be under the tab Info and Resources Hub. So you can look for that in the next couple of days, and we will send out the link as well directly to you all for registering. And then finally, we do periodically offer webinars like this one. We call them our Education Works series, just to try to get folks informed about all sorts of issues around schools. And we have one coming up next month with Commissioner Pam Stewart, and she's going to share some research on, tell us about what we know about the nation's high schools with the lowest graduation rates, and then pivoting from that to what evidence-based practices are making a difference in closing achievement gaps. So I hope you'll join us for that. There's a link there. You can go ahead and register if you like at 4 p.m. on October 23rd. So thanks again to Andrea and Beth, and to all of you for your interest in this important topic of considering candidacy for school board. We hope you'll share this with any others in your community who are raising interest in serving in this important office and helping us continue to move student achievement forward in our state. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.